Welcome to the debate. Today is Tuesday, January 20, 2026. The ballots have been counted, the envelopes ripped open, and the Baseball Writers Association of America has officially announced the class of 2026. And, well, we finally have a resolution for two absolute giants of the outfield. Carlos Beltran and Andrew Jones are officially heading to Cooperstown. It's a massive, joyous day for them, their families, and frankly, for anyone who grew up watching just defensive excellence in center field.
It really is. And, seeing Andrew Jones finally get that call is it's satisfying. We're talking about a guy who was essentially a shallow shortstop playing center field. But as we've sort of come to expect in baseball over the last decade or so, the spotlight shining on the new inductees is being eclipsed by a very large, very familiar shadow. The all-time home run leader, Barry Bonds, has once again been excluded. This time, the rejection didn't come from the writers, but from the Contemporary Baseball Era Committee. And the results were, well, emphatic is one word for it. Brutal might be another.
Emphatic and, in my view, historically negligent. We learned today that Bonds received fewer than 5 votes from the 16-member committee. Under the current rules, this essentially triggers a mandatory freeze-out, so we won't see his name considered again until 2031. So, yeah, despite the champagne popping for Beltran and Jones, we are right back in the trenches of the fiercest culture war in American sports history.
It is the argument that just refuses to die, but the central question, it really remains the same, even as the calendar flips and we get further away from his playing days. Does the statistical greatest of all time belong in the Hall of Fame despite his undeniable connection to performance-enhancing drugs, or does his inclusion just completely destroy the very integrity the institution is sworn to protect?
That is the question, and you know where I stand. I argue that the Hall of Fame is a museum of history, not a cathedral of saints. Barry Bonds represents an era, a level of dominance, and a statistical reality that you can't erase it with a vote. To tell the story of baseball without him is to tell a lie.
And I take the other side. The Hall of Fame isn't just a history book or some dusty archive. It is an honor. It's governed by specific rules regarding character and integrity. Admitting Barry Bonds doesn't just acknowledge history, it validates the subversion of the game's fundamental fairness, and I think insults every player who competed the right way.
Okay, let's get into the weeds on this, because I think people forget the sheer scale of what we're dismissing here. We aren't talking about a guy who was, pretty good and cheated to become great. We are talking about the man who hit 762 career home runs. That is the mountaintop. He won 7 MVP awards. 7! No other player in the history of Major League Baseball has won more than 3. Not Ruth, not Mantle, not Trout.
Which is a stat that stands out, certainly. It's an anomaly.
It's more than an anomaly. It's absurd. He has 8 Gold Gloves. He is the only member of the 500 home run, 500 stolen base club. Actually, let me correct that. He's the only member of the 400-400 club. Nobody else is even close to that combination of power and speed. My position is rooted in this idea that the Hall of Fame exists to document the sport. I mean, if you walk into a museum of American history, you don't only see the benevolent leaders. You see the figures who shaped the times for better or for worse. Barry Bonds was the primary protagonist of baseball for 22 seasons. Excluding him renders the Hall an incomplete story.
I understand the museum argument. I really do. It's the most common defense. But you're kind of glossing over the for better or worse part. You can document the worst without honoring it with a plaque.
But consider the timeline. Before the alleged steroid use began, which most reports, including the exhaustive Game of Shadows reporting, peg around 1998 or 1999, Bonds was already a first-ballot Hall of Famer. He had 3 MVPs before the controversy even started. He was arguably the best player of the 1990s before he became the monster of the 2000s. If he retired in 1998, he's in on the first ballot. So are we punishing him for the second half of his career by erasing the first half?
That is a compelling point. But I'm sorry, I just don't buy that the before absolves the after. You can't partition a career like a hard drive. You're talking about numbers on a page, but the Hall of Fame is not just a spreadsheet. It is an institution governed by a very specific set of criteria known as Rule 5. This isn't some unwritten code. It's literally in the instructions handed to the voters. It explicitly tells them to consider a player's record, playing ability, integrity, sportsmanship, and character.
Character clauses are notoriously subjective, though. I mean, we've had racists, drunks, and gamblers inducted for decades. Ty Cobb wasn't exactly a Boy Scout.
Subjective, perhaps, but not invisible, and certainly not irrelevant. Barry Bonds violated the fundamental fairness of the game. When Ryne Sandberg was inducted, he gave a speech that really resonates with my side of this debate. He talked about playing the game the right way and having respect for the institution. Admission to the Hall is the highest honor the sport can bestow. It's not just acknowledging you existed, it's celebrating you. There is a distinction between the museum, where, by the way, artifacts like his 756th home run ball reside right now, and the Plaque Gallery. The gallery is for the immortals who respected the game. Admitting Bonds tells every kid and every clean player that the ends justify the means.
I appreciate the distinction between the museum artifacts and the plaque gallery. That's a fair nuance. But let's dig into the ends justify the means aspect, specifically regarding the statistics. Because if we are going to talk about respecting the game, we have to talk about the statistical anomaly that was Barry Bonds from 1999 to 2004. You call it cheating, I call it a display of skill that steroids alone cannot explain.
The anomaly that was chemically engineered?
The anomaly that transcended chemistry. Look at the 2004 season. This is the peak of the fear he instilled in pitchers. He had an on-base percentage, an OBP, of .609. Think about that number for a second. In a professional sport where the best pitchers in the world are trying to get you out, where failing 70% of the time makes you an all-star, he was reaching base safely 60% of the time. That is video game logic. It's unheard of. He was walked 232 times, 120 of them intentional. Managers were terrified to throw him a strike.
But why were they terrified? Because he had turned himself into a comic book character.
Because he had mastered the strike zone. My point is, steroids might make you stronger, they might help you recover from injury faster, but they don't give you the eye to recognize a slider from a fastball in a fraction of a second. They don't give you the discipline to swing the bat only once a game and put it in McCovey Cove. There were hundreds of players using PEDs in that era. We know this. It was widespread. Yet none of them, not McGuire, not Sosa, not Sheffield, put up God-mode statistics like Bonds. That speaks to a generational genius that we are willfully ignoring because we don't like the medicine he took.
See, that's where I have to push back hard. You're trying to separate the skill from the substance. And, well, scientifically, I don't think you can. You say steroids don't give you the eye, but let's look at the physiology of what he was reportedly taking. PEDs allow you to train harder and recover faster, yes, but they also generate incredible, unnatural bat speed. When you have unnatural bat speed, you can wait longer on a pitch. You can identify the spin later than a normal human because your hands are fast enough to catch up. That creates the illusion of a better eye.
So you think the .609 OBP is purely a product of the lab? That he didn't have to have the talent to make contact?
I think it's inextricably linked. You cannot parse them out, and frankly, I reject the validity of those specific stats because they were artificial. We saw the physical changes, we saw the head size growth, literally his hat size expanded late in his career. That doesn't happen naturally to a man in his late 30s. We know about the Bulko scandal, the cream and the clear. This wasn't just taking a pill, this was a regimented schedule designed to beat the system. And look at the aging curve. That is the smoking gun.
What about the aging curve?
In baseball history, every player, Ruth, Mays, Aaron, they all begin to decline around age 34 or 35. Their bat slows down, their bodies break down. Barry Bonds had his best statistical seasons at age 37, 38, and 39. That is biologically impossible without assistance. He subverted the natural order of the sport.
But he was never suspended by the league. That matters. We're convicting him based on books and leaks, not on league discipline.
That's a technicality of the era, not an exoneration of the act. The 73 home run season in 2001 effectively broke the logic of the sport. It erased the achievements of historical greats like Hank Aaron and Roger Maris, and it did so unfairly. You're asking us to marvel at numbers that were achieved while he was allegedly using substances provided by Greg Anderson. It's fruit of the poisonous tree. If I rob a bank and use the money to build a beautiful hospital, I'm still a bank robber. You can't just look at the hospital and say, wow, what a great builder.
That analogy is catchy, but I'm not convinced it holds up because it implies a moral purity that the Hall of Fame has never actually possessed. And this brings me to the context of the era and the hypocrisy of this integrity argument. Because if we are going to start banning bank robbers, we need to look at who is running the bank.
You're referring to the commissioner?
I am. Bud Selig, the commissioner of baseball during that entire time frame. He is in the Hall of Fame. He has a plaque. Bud Selig oversaw the entire steroid era. He watched the home run chase, he watched the revenue skyrocket, he opened the new stadiums that the home run chase built. He profited immensely from the renewed interest in baseball that Bauman's helped create. If the architect of the era is in, how can you bar the worker who built it? It feels like we are punishing the players for a systemic failure that management was complicit in.
I see the contradiction, certainly. It is an uncomfortable reality. But there is a difference between negligence and active cheating. Selig might have turned a blind eye, but he didn't inject himself.
Is there a moral difference? Or is it just convenient? And it's not just Selig. Look at the induction of David Ortiz, a first ballot Hall of Famer, a beloved figure. But it was reported by the New York Times that he failed the same 2003 survey test that is used to crucify Sammy Sosa. That Ortiz gets a pass because he's charismatic and big poppy, while Bonds gets the door slammed because he was surly to the media. That's not integrity, that's a popularity contest.
The Ortiz situation is complicated because that test was supposed to be anonymous and the results have been disputed, even by Commissioner Manfred later on. But let's look further back. You mentioned the Hall of Saints earlier.
Exactly. Gaylord Perry wrote a book called Me and the Spitter. He literally wrote a memoir about cheating by doctoring the baseball with Vaseline and spit to make it move unnaturally. He's in. Cap Anson was a segregationist who actively worked to keep black players out of the league. He's in. Why is the moral line drawn specifically and so rigidly at Barry Bonds? It feels arbitrary.
I understand the frustration with the inconsistency, I really do. But two wrongs don't make a right. Just because Bud Selig is in, and I might agree with you that his inclusion is problematic, doesn't mean the Hall should lower the bar further to fix it. And I have to push back on the comparison to Gaylord Perry.
How so? Cheating is cheating, isn't it? Breaking the rules to get an edge?
There is a distinction between gamesmanship like spitballs or science stealing, which have been part of the game's lore forever, and systemic chemical enhancement. Spitting on the ball uses physics. It requires skill to manipulate that ball. It doesn't alter your biology. It doesn't fundamentally change the human machine. Bonds and the Balco group were turning the players into something else. They were altering the chemistry of the athlete. That is a different category of offense.
But the era itself was the Wild West. Everyone was looking for an edge. Bonds just found the best one.
The era was the Wild West. Yes. But Barry Bonds, in his own words, has suggested that there were new rules. That's a convenient rewriting of history. There was a ban on drugs, even if enforcement was lax. Everyone knew it was wrong. That's why they hid it. That's why they lied about it to grand juries. If it was just looking for an edge, why the secrecy? And I want to bring up Doug Glanville's perspective here, which I find incredibly moving and often overlooked in the stats debate.
The former outfielder?
Right. Glanville, who played during that era, argues that it wasn't just about breaking records. It was about economics. It was about making it impossible for clean players to compete for jobs and contracts against users. If you're a marginal player trying to feed your family and the guy next to you takes PEDs and hits 30 homers, he takes your roster spot. He takes your paycheck. When you took PEDs, you weren't just helping yourself. You were actively taking food off the table of the guy who was trying to do it the right way. That is a definition of a lack of integrity. It's predatory.
That is a fair point regarding the competitive landscape for roster spots. I won't dismiss the impact on the marginal player. That is a real victim in this scenario. However, we are talking about the Hall of Fame, the apex of the sport. We are talking about the best of the best. And this brings us to the recent news and the new rules that seem designed to erase this history entirely.
You mean the committee vote that just happened?
Exactly. The Contemporary Baseball Era Committee. We need to look at these numbers. Bonds received fewer than 5 votes out of 16. Under the new rules, this failure initiates a freeze.
He is barred from consideration for 3 years, but because he missed the threshold so badly, it effectively pushes him out until 2031. This feels like a pocket veto. It feels like baseball's power brokers, the executives, the former players, are just trying to run out the clock until Bonds is dead or forgotten.
Or perhaps it's a definitive statement from the people who know the game best.
It's avoidance. Bonds has said he feels vindicated by the legal system because his obstruction of justice conviction was overturned. He won in federal court. But he's being punished by the sport in a way that feels personal. It feels like retribution for being difficult, for not playing the media game, just as much as for the PEDs.
It might feel personal because he made it personal, but I support the committee's decision. And remember, who is on that committee? It's not just sports writers who maybe had a bad interaction with him in the locker room. It's his peers. It's guys like Greg Maddux, Jack Morris, Ryne Sandberg. These are the men who stood on the mound and faced him. They saw the change in his bat speed up close.
And perhaps held grudges.
Or perhaps they saw better than anyone else what was happening. If Greg Maddux, arguably the smartest pitcher of his generation, a guy who studied hitters like a scientist, looks at what Bonds was doing and says, no, that wasn't right, that doesn't belong in the Hall, the public should respect that judgment. It is an erasure. As I said, the 756 home run ball is in the museum. It has an asterisk on it, cut out by the fan who caught it. That is the appropriate way to tell the story. The museum acknowledges he existed and what he did. The plaque gallery is for immortality. Bonds doesn't deserve the immortality of the plaque because he decided he was bigger than the game.
But by keeping him out of the plaque gallery, you are creating a hall of very good saints. You are creating a curated, sanitized version of history that ignores the reality of what we watched for 20 years. You can't tell the story of the 1990s and 2000s without Barry Bonds. He was the sun around which the entire sport revolved. To have a Hall of Fame without the all-time leader in home runs, walks, and MVPs is to have a Hall of Fame that is fundamentally broken. It's like having a rock and roll Hall of Fame without the Rolling Stones because they did drugs.
That analogy doesn't hold because rock and roll isn't a competitive sport with rules designed to ensure a level playing field. The essence of sport is fair competition. Rock and roll is art, baseball is a contest.
But the level playing field is a myth. It never existed. Some teams have more money, some players have better genetics, some stadiums are easier to hit in.
It's an ideal we strive for. It's the social contract of the sport, and admitting Bonds shatters that ideal. The 6-year freeze is a necessary cooling off period because the electorate, both the writers and now the committee, has made its stance clear. Character matters. You cannot cheat the game to such a massive extent and then demand its highest honor just because the math looks impressive.
I think we're seeing that the cooling off is actually a freezing out. And I worry that by 2031, we'll just have the same conversation, but with even less context as the witnesses to his greatness age out. We are losing the nuance of the era, and eventually, he becomes just a villain in a storybook rather than the complex, brilliant player he was.
Or perhaps by 2031, we will have fully accepted that statistics without integrity are just numbers, not greatness. Maybe the distance will bring clarity that more isn't always better if the cost is the soul of the sport. We might look back and realize the committee did the right thing by holding the line.
We're reaching the end of our time, but I want to try to summarize where we land on this. For me, excluding Barry Bonds turns the Hall of Fame into something less than it should be. It becomes a judgment on morality rather than a celebration of baseball skill and history. The numbers, 762, 7 MVPs, the .609 OBP, they happened. We saw them. Pretending they don't count for a plaque makes the Hall incomplete. It leaves a hole in the center of the story.
And for me, the Hall of Fame must protect the game standards. Barry Bonds was a transcendent talent, arguably the best potential we've ever seen. But he made a choice. He chose to prioritize himself over the rules and over his peers. In doing so, he forfeited his right to be honored alongside names like Aaron, Mays, and Ruth. Greatness requires honoring the game, not just dominating it.
It's clear that while Beltran and Jones enter the Hall today, and rightfully so, the ghost of Barry Bonds isn't going anywhere. He will continue to haunt every election.
No, he won't. The debate will persist until his final eligibility in 2031 and likely far beyond that.
leaving the fans to decide if the asterisk belongs on the record book or if the asterisk belongs on the Hall of Fame itself for missing the greatest player of all time.
And that is a decision every fan has to make for themselves.
Thank you for listening to the debate. We'll see you next time.